Okay, you're on.
Okay, on the top of Lamed Vavam and Aleph, the second line after the period, Kasha de Rabbi Yossi, we have a contradiction between Rabbi Yossi and the Mishnah, who says whenever there's a suffix Erev situation, he says it's kosher. And then we quoted, however, a brisa in the previous Amud that said that if a person had Tuma D'Rabbanan, like 3 Lugan Amayim Shuvim fell on him, and now he was Tovel, there's a question whether he was Tovel properly or not, whether it was 40 sa'ah, there wasn't 40 sa'ah, was he topa completely, not topa completely, did he go in the mikveh that had the 40 sa'ah? So he said in such a case, Rabbi Yossi was mitami. Rabbi Yossi held you have to go l'chumah, misafek, and say the person is tummy. That's a d'rabbanan situation. Rabbi Yossi says misafek, you have to assume the person's still tummy. Here with respect to tchumen, it's presumably a d'rabbanan situation, and Rabbi Yossi says, well, if it's a suffix eruv, we're going to say it's kasha, that it's a valid error. So that's a kasha. It seems to be a contradiction between these two statements of Rabbi Yossi. So I'm that we have to be more strict with respect to tuma, shiny tuma, however, yesh le'ikum in a Torah. Even if the person is only tamei midrabanan, since it's modeled after tuma, which is on a daraisa level, so therefore we go the chumrah. Since suffix daraisa the chumrah, and it's modeled after a daraisa. So we say, well, wait a second, tchumen is also modeled on a daraisa because Shabbos nami, Deraisa, Shabbos, the sermon of Shabbos is Deraisa, and the Kasha is assuming that the Isser of Tchumen itself is the Deraisa. So the Gemara answers no, because Rabbi Yossi, Tchumen Derabanan. Rabbi Yossi holds that Tchumen is only Derabanan, and unlike the case of Tuma, where if you're Maker with respect to one case of Tuma, you might be Maker with respect to cases of Tuma Deraisa. But if you're going to be Maker with respect to Tchumen, you're not going to be Maker with respect to Malachas Deraisa, because as Rashi explains, people understand the distinction between tchumen on the one hand and malachos on the other hand. B'bais ema, another way of reconciling Rabbi Yossi is hadidei hadarabe. That Rabbi Yossi himself is machmir with respect to a suffix d'Rabbanan. In the Mishnah, that where Rabbi Yossi says that suffix erev is kosher, that's because he's testifying on behalf of his Rebbe Avtumis. You remember that Rabbi Yossi said, "Oh, Avtumis has this testimony on behalf of 5 Sekanim that we go the kula that a suffix erev is kosher," but he himself did not necessarily hold that way. And Dekanami, and that in fact seems to be indicated by the text in the Mishnah, Diktani, because it says in the Mishnah, I'm Rabbi Yossi substantiate his shita by saying, well, it's not me, it's Avtumis, right? Avtumis, hey, in Mishum Chamisha Sekanim, suffix erev kosher, Shema Mina, that really when he said that you go l'kula, he was only speaking on behalf of his Rebbe and not necessarily himself. Rava gives a different explanation. Hasam Hainu Taima de Rabbi Yossi says in the case of Tuma, the person started out as Tameh. The person had become Tameh midrabanan. Now we're just not sure whether he toivel properly. So we say Hame Tameh al Cheskaso. Ve'ema lo tavel. We say that he started out as Tameh. So since there's a question whether he immersed properly or not, so we'll say that maybe he didn't immerse properly. We'll keep in his chazaka, which was Tameh. So the Gemara asks, well, according to that explanation, Adarabba, one of the cases was we're not sure if the mikveh had 40 sa'ah or not. So presumably this is a mikveh that we knew that yesterday had 40 sa'ah. Just now we discovered it didn't have 40 sa'ah after the person was taiva, and we're not sure when it came up 40 sa'ah. And we're not sure when the mikveh went down from 40 sa'ah. So why don't we just say, let's keep it on its chazaka that it was 40 sa'ah. So the answer is no, we're assuming that it was measured yesterday that it had 40 sa'ah, but the case has actually been mikvah shalon imdad. This is a mikvah that had never been measured, so we never knew in the first place whether it had 40 sa'ah, and that's why we would go l'chumah. Tanya, Brisa says, Kesan Rabbi Yossi suffix erev kosher. What is the way that this manifests itself? That if we have a suffix, whether the erev tchumen was in a valid state during Bein Hashmashos, when a person is Kone Erev, that we would say, we go l'kula, that it would be kosher. That's what we paskin, halacha l'maisa. We need to understand how it works, right? So Erev b'truma, and let's say a person made an Erev with truma, and if the truma became tameh, so then it would be ineligible to serve as the Erev beit tchumen. So it all depends. Did it become tameh before Bein Hashmashos, or did it become tameh after Bein Hashmashos, which wouldn't be a problem? So Erev suffix ba'odim nitmes. So suffix whether it became tameh during daytime, before it was Shabbos, before it was Bein Hashmashos, before sunset. Suffix mishachashechan. So suffix whether it became tameh after nightfall. Suffix mishachashechan nitmes. V'chein b'peiros. And so too, if a person made an erev with a peiros, with fruit, suffix ba'odim niskanu. So suffix as to it started out as tevel. And the question is, did he take Trumas Samaisis on it so that it would be edible, would be eligible to be eaten before at the end of the day? Safek Mishikashechan is canoe, or a person, did it late. He's not really supposed to wait that late to do it, but it's a possibility that it wasn't fixed. The Trumas Samaisis weren't taken until it was already Shabbos. So Zel Safek Erev Kosher. So this is a case of Safek Erev that would be kosher, because we're dealing with, at least if we focus on the Truma case. So the Truma case, again, the Paris case is a little confusing, but we'll get to it in a second. But the Truma case, so we know that the Truma was perfectly pure, tahor, uncontaminated Truma when it was placed down in the place where the person wanted to acquire his residence for a Shabbos. So it was Becheskas Taro, it's Becheskas good. So now I only have a question, when did it lose that chazaka? I say suffix is going to be kosher. But if you started out with a suffix to begin with, so then that's not going to be a kosher eruv. It has to have started out with a chazaka that it was good. About either bitruma, suffix Torah, suffix mea. But if a person first, when he put down the food, it was a suffix, whether it was Torah or Tameh, so that's no good. And similarly, b'chem peros, suffix niskanu, suffix lo niskanu, ain't a suffix eruv. And so too with peros, when it was put down, it was a question mark whether the peros was good or not. It was a suffix to begin with, so that's not a suffix eruv kosher type of situation. There, even Rabbi Yossi would say that we would be a machmir. So ma'ishna truma. So wait a second. I understand the case of truma. You'd be meko because when you put down the truma was still tahor. So ma'ishna truma dermin hamen truma al cheskasa ve'ema tahorahi. Well, so I understand the case of truma. You say that we should shtel a chazaka that it started out as tahor, so we'll assume that it was still tahor when bein hashmashu survived. But peros nami, but the peros, it sounded like we were talking about a peros tevel situation. Tevel is not eligible to be eaten. So why don't we just say, keep it in its chazaka that it was ineligible? Peros nami hamei tevel acheskasa ve'ema lo niskanu. It started out as ineligible, so we should be machmir in that case and assume that it's still ineligible. So lo tema safek b'bayom niskanu. So we have to change the case a little bit. When we being mako, in the case of peros, it doesn't mean that it was tevel and we're just not sure whether it was fixed, whether the tithes were taken prior to the end of the day. We're dealing with peros that were completely taken care of, with the trumas and maasas have been taken. Safek b'bayom nidmu, but then they got mixed together with tevel. That I had perfectly fine peros, the trumas and maasas have been taken, and now they got mixed together. There was some peros nearby in this place where the person wants to acquire their residence that had not been taken care of, that had not had trumas and maasros taken on their behalf, and therefore they're ineligible to be eaten, and now they're all mixed together. That's called dimua, and we don't know, and therefore you can't eat any of it, and we don't know when the dimua took place. Did it take place when it was still daytime? Did it only take place after nightfall? So since at the time the person put down the peros, they're perfectly eligible of being eaten, so we say they must have remained eligible, they must have remained alone and independent and not mixed together with the tevel during the Bein Hashmashas period, so we're going to be meko. So therefore, it's similar to the case of the truma, which when the person put it down, it was truma tahora, and only afterwards we discovered that it was nitmei, so it became tamei. Bar Shmuel bar Yitzchak Mavuna. Question posed, a person has two loaves of bread, achas etzemea be'achas etzahora. So we don't know which is which, but they're both standing there. They're sitting in the place where the person wants to acquire his residence for Shabbos. Let's assume they're both sitting like in baskets or whatever. And he says, I want my eruv to be with the kosher loaf. I don't know which is which, so I wouldn't be able to eat either one, but whichever one is kosher, I want that to serve as my eruv. Whichever one is not contaminated, right? Presumably we're talking about truma. If it was schooling, we don't really care. If it was tamei, presumably we're talking about truma. So mao. So is this going to be good, since he did after all identify the tahor loaf? He just doesn't know which one it is. So Tibali Rabbi Meir, Tibali Rabbi Yossi. So we can ask this question according to Rabbi Meir, was normally machmir in a suffix case. We can ask the question according to Rabbi Yossi, according to the Mishnah, is mekel in a suffix case. Tibali Rabbi Meir, that maybe Rabbi Meir would be mekel in this case. I can come Rabbi Meir Hasan Leka Torah, Rabbi Meir is machmir in a case where I discover that the loaf is tamei, and I have to be worried that maybe it was tamei even before Bein Hashmashas. But here I know there's a loaf, there's stars, so maybe I would be mekel. Odilma. Or maybe I can go in the opposite direction. Say even Rabbi Yossi would be machmir in this case. I feel Rabbi Yossi will come in lahasam dimisa ditoiva yadalo. That in Rabbi Yossi's case, we know which loaf he's making the Erev on. There's a particular loaf, and that loaf was, and that loaf now it might be now it's tummy, and I don't know when it became tummy. Did it become tummy before Bein Hashmashos? Did it become tummy after it was already nightfall? I don't know, but I know which loaf we're talking about. But here we don't even know which loaf we're talking about because he doesn't know which loaf is the tahor loaf. And generally, you need to. So that's the question. So Amalei Bein Rabbi Yosef Bein Rabbi Meir. So the answer, which was provided by Rav Huna to the question, is that even that according to both of them, Bein Rabbi Meir, Bein Rabbi Meir, this would be no good because you need to have something that you would, in theory, be able to eat. Because the idea of setting aside food for Erev Tzukumen is that it's food that if you wanted to eat, you'd be able to eat. So that if you, in whatever state you're putting it down when it's going to be eligible, it's not just, I know there's eligible food there. I have to be able to actually take my hands, pick up the food, and eat the food. It has to be something that I would be able to handle with my hands and put in my mouth. But Lakin, I don't have that over here because I know that there is a loaf of bread I'd be able to eat, but I don't know which one it is. So therefore, I wouldn't be able to eat either one of them. So even according to Rabbi Yossi, this would be no good. This is a very important principle with respect to Erev Tzukumen, the idea of Suda Haruya Miba O Yom. That's the important concept of the day. Remember, for Erev Tzukumen, you need Suda Haruya Miba O Yom. So by Minei Rav Mir Rav Nachman. So Rav asked the question of Rav Nachman, Kikasu Hayom Chol Amacha Kodesh. So Rav asked Rav Nachman, if a person says about a loaf of bread, today, it's going to be chol, meaning today, Friday. I'm keeping it, for myself that I'd be able to eat it. But for tomorrow, namely Shabbos, it's going to be consecrated. Lamacha kodesh. And he says to a shliach, go to the place I want to acquire residence, put the loaf down, and use it for my Erev Tzukumen. So mahu. So do we say this was something that was eligible to be eaten because today on Friday he could eat it? We would say it's not eligible to be eaten because tomorrow Shabbos he can't eat it because it's going to be consecrated. So Amalei Eruvo Eruv. So he said that the Eruv in this particular case, Rav Nachman answered that the Eruv in this particular case is going to be a good Eruv. What about the other direction? Hayom Kodesh, he says today it's going to be consecrated. And tomorrow, automatically at the end of the day, I'm going to have the sanctity of the loaf transferred onto some money that I've set aside. So it's going to be neschalo. It's going to be redeemed from its consecrated state. So tomorrow, Shabbos, is going to be eligible to be eaten. He says to Shliach, go and make an Erev for me with this loaf. Mao, is that going to be a good Erev or not? So Amalei, ain't Erev. So Nachman said, in that case, the Erev is not going to be a good Erev. So Maishna, so Rabba, who had asked the question of Rav Nachman, said, what's the difference between these two different cases of whether you start out with it being something you could eat and then it becomes consecrated on Shabbos that is good, or it starts out as something which is consecrated on Friday, and then come Shabbos, it's something which you're not going to, something which will not be consecrated anymore, and you will be able to eat where you say that's no good. So Maishna, what's the difference between the two cases? So Amalei Nachman Yisman, he said all that called the milcha. He said that this is an expression. He said that if you measure for me a large mound of salt, so then I'll provide you with an answer. Meaning that I have a good answer, you have to work for it. Hayom Chol, he said the case, Hayom Chol Amacha Kodesh, where today is going to be secular, it's going to be eligible for me, and tomorrow Shabbos is going to be consecrated. I said that's good. Hayom Chol Amacha Kodesh, Misfekel Anaktale Kedusha. So if it's suffix as to when the Kedusha, at what point in time does the Kedusha come in? Because Bein Hashmashos is sort of like this questionable period. You need to be Kona Shvisa during the twilight period. So you don't know exactly when the Kedusha is going to settle in. So misafek, we say that it settled in after it was already Bein Hashmashos, and therefore, come Bein Hashmashos, it was still eligible to be eaten, and therefore it would be a good Eruv. However, Hayom Kodesh Amacha Chol, where the loaf of bread started out as Kodesh, it started out as consecrated, and I need to know at what moment in time that sanctity gets transferred, and that needs to be in place at the beginning of Bein Hashmashos. Out of a suffix, we're not going to have the Kedusha go away. We need that suffix situation, whatever Bein Hashmashos hits, we need you to be able to eat it, and we don't know that you were able to eat it because maybe it was consecrated at that time. So we start off with whatever its state was when you hit Bein Hashmashos. So was it state that it was eligible to be eaten? So then we're going to be Mekel. Was it state that beforehand it was not eligible to be eaten? Then we're going to be Machmir. So now in Awesome, we have a Mishnah there. Where is there in the Maseches Tavul Yom? Lagin Tavul Yom, I have a bottle, like a wooden container, Tavul that Shemalu Min Achavis Shel Meiser. It was a Tavul Yom container, meaning that it was something, the container itself was Tameh. It had been immersed in a mikvah, and now it's still going to be Tameh until nightfall. It's going to be in a state of Tavul Yom. The container, when it's in a state of Tavul Yom, if it's going to touch Chulin, it's not going to convey Tuma. If it's going to touch Meiser, it's not going to convey Tuma. But if it would touch Truma, it's going to convey Tuma. So this is sort of a complicated case because the contents of this container, which is a container which is a Tavul Yom, so the contents of this container is Meiser Rishon. It's Meiser Rishon, which is not yet eligible to be eaten because it doesn't have the Trumas Meiser taken from it yet. In order for Meiser Rishon to be eaten, the Trumas Meiser, 1/10 of it, has to be taken off and given to the Kohanim. So I have this container of Meiser, Shemalu Min Achavish Meiser, Tevel, and it's still Tevel because it hasn't had the Trumas Meiser taken from it. So the person says, Harei Zeh Trumas Meiser L'Kshetekshach. So he says that I'm going to take Trumas Meiser, I'm going to take Trumas Meiser from it, from the time in which it's going to be nightfall, meaning that this is talking about presumably a case of Friday afternoon, and come Shabbos, the Trumas Meiser is going to be removed from it. So that works. If Trumas Meiser is going to be, something is going to count as a Trumas Meiser after nightfall, so then I don't have a Tavul Yom problem anymore because the bottle is only in the status of Tavul Yom until nightfall. But after nightfall, it's not in the status of Tavul Yom anymore. So therefore, he says that this so what's in this container will count as Trumas Meiser once it becomes nightfall. So now so now it's going to be kosher at that point in time. So dvar kayamin. So all that is fine and good. But if he says he wants this to count as Erev Tzuchumin, that's a different story. It's not going to be eligible to be count as Erev Tzuchumin. Why is that? Because it's not something that can be eaten until nightfall. Because since the Trumas Meiser can't be taken from it until the container is no longer a Tavul Yom, so therefore until nightfall it's not eligible to be eaten. So when Bein Hashmashos comes along, it's not going to be eligible to be eaten. So Rava says, so this teaches me an important principle, maybe. So Sameres, Sofa Yom, Kone Eruv. He says that when is it that the Eruv becomes Chal, that it has to be in a state that would be eligible to serve as Erev Tzuchumin? That's at the end of the day. At the end of the day, when the lagin is still a Tavul Yom and the container is still a Tavul Yom, you wouldn't be able to take the Trumas Meiser yet because it would become Tameh. And at that point in time, since it's ineligible, so that would be when the Erev Tzuchumin would take effect. So at that point in time, it's ineligible to serve as an Erev because the Trumas Meiser is not yet taken. Let's turn the page. Because if the Erev really only becomes Chal and only becomes vested at the beginning of Shabbos, then everything would have been fine because at that point in time, the contents of the container were already fixed. Why wouldn't it have counted if he set it aside? Told the shliach to set it aside as his Erev Tzuchumin where he wanted to acquire residence. So Papa says it's not a proof. Even if the Eruv only really becomes effective at the very beginning of the day, meaning, at the end of the Bein Hashmashos period, even if it only becomes effective at that point in time, nonetheless, we apply this principle that we just mentioned as our special rule of the day for Maseches Eruvin, that you need a Suda Ruyim Ba'od Yom, that even if the Eruv is only Chal at the end of the period of Bein Hashmashos, when you go into Bein Hashmashos during Friday afternoon itself, at the point of the last moment of Friday afternoon, as you go into Bein Hashmashos, you need a Suda that the person wouldn't have been able to eat at that point in time. At this point in time, you didn't have the Trumas Meiser taken from it because you couldn't have the Trumas Meiser taken from it until it would be Shabbos already. So therefore, for that reason, it can't serve as a valid Erev Tzuchumin. but it's not dependent upon whether it's Sofa Yom Koneh or Tchilas Yom Koneh. Okay, this brings us to the next Mishnah, Naya Mishnah. Masna Adam Eruvo. Can a person make a Tanai on his Eruv that he's not sure, he's sort of like, living in his house, and he's not sure whether he wants to extend the distance in which he can walk on Shabbos towards the east or towards the west. Right now, we can walk 2,000 amos towards the east, and he can walk 2,000 amos to the west. But he might want to walk 4,000 amos to the east. He might want to walk 4,000 amos to the west. He's not sure which way. It might depend on which shear he wants to go to, because there's like, a big Talmid Chacham who's coming. He's not sure the Talmid Chacham is going to be coming to the east. He's not sure the Talmid Chacham is going to be coming to the west, so he wants to hedge his bets. Or for some other reason, we'll see the Mishnah will give cases. Or he wants to run away from bandits. He says that there are some non-Jewish bandits that are marauding, they're running around, and I want to run away from them. So if they're coming from the east, I want to extend my distance to the west. If they're coming from the west, I want to extend my Erev to the east, right? If they're going to be coming from the bad guys, they're going to be coming from the east, so then I want my Erev to count in the west, and he puts food in both locations. He puts food out 2,000 amos to the east, and he puts food to 2,000 amos out to the west. And if it turns out the bandits are coming from the west, so then I want the Erev that I placed on the east side to be my Erev Tzkumin, so I can go further to the east side, Rup in the Mizrach. And then if there are bandits coming from both directions, so then I want to be able to choose, which direction I feel that, I'll be safest. So I want to be able to make up my mind tomorrow. And if it turns out the bandits don't come all together, so then I just want to, stay with where I am and have the option to go 2,000 amos to the east and 2,000 amos to the west. If he's going to extend his Eruv to the east, so then he doesn't get to go to the west at all. If he's going to extend his Eruv to the west, he wouldn't otherwise be able to go to the east at all. And similarly, if there's a Chacham who's coming to give a drasha, and he wants to be able to go to the shear, but it would require him to go more than 2,000 amos out, either to the east or to the west. So he says, if the Chacham is coming min Mizrach, let's say the Chacham was like 6,000 amos out before Shabbos minus 2 amos, and the Chacham isn't even necessarily, there yet within the 4,000 amos period, but, he might come there within the 4,000 amos geographic distance, but he might come there during the course of Shabbos. So if he comes there during the course of Shabbos, I want to be able to go 4,000 amos to where the Chacham is going to be. So in Ba Chacham, in a Mizrach, I will be the Mizrach. If he's going to come on the east side, there'll be 4,000 amos out, on the east side. I want to be able to go there. So my the food that I set aside, 2,000 amos out on the east side, should count as my Erev, then I can go another 2,000 amos to the east. And the same thing with respect to the west, if he comes to the west. And if there's, a Rosh Hashiva who comes to the east and another Rosh Hashiva who comes to the west, so I want to be able to decide, tomorrow, which one I want to go to, the Makom She'ertze Elech, and it'll turn out that's, whatever I decide tomorrow will be retroactively, what I had in mind today. Well, that's what we call Bereira. That is what we call a retroactive designation. Can you make a retroactive designation or not? The punchline is you can make a retroactive designation, Bereira, to say, oh, the Mafreya, this is what I really meant. When it turns out, when things turn out a particular way later on, you could do that with respect to a din derabanan. You can't do that with respect to a din deraisa. So we assume techumin is a din derabanan, and therefore you could do this when it comes to techumin. You wouldn't be able to do this with respect to a din deraisa. Lo l'kan. If the chacham doesn't end up coming all together, hareini kibnei iri. So then I just want to be like a regular resident of the city and be able to walk 2,000 amos either way. Rabbi Yehuda says that he doesn't get to decide. If say there's a chacham that comes to the east and a chacham comes to the west, the Tanna Kama said, so he can decide which one he wanted to go to. Say, it turns out I really wanted to hear this Rosh Hashiva and opposed to the other Rosh Hashiva. So Abida says that works when the Rosh Hashiva are sort of like co-equal, where we can say, he really all along wanted to go to the Rosh Hashiva that he chose at the end. But if one of the Rosh Hashiva, one of the Rebbeim who are coming to give a drasha is his own Rebbe, so then we say, of course, he would have had in mind his own Rebbe. He can't change his designation afterwards and say, I really want to go to the other Rebbe. No, if one of them is his Rebbe, so then we presume that this was his mindset and he has to go in that direction. So it's just that if both of them were equally his Rebbeim, okay, so then it could be his mindset, was that could have arguably been either one legitimately, so then he could choose either one. So the Gemara says, Tani Ifcha. So Rabbi Yitzchak has sort of like the opposite approach for Kula Masnisin. What do you mean the opposite approach? And his approach was that, if the Nachum are coming I want to go where the Nachum are coming. The Russians are coming. I want to go where they're coming. They're going to be to the east. So if they end up in the east, I want to extend my area to the east so that I can come and greet the Nachum. That was the way. And if they come to the west, I want to extend my area to the west so I can greet them. I don't want to run away from the Nachum. No. I want to embrace the Nachum. And in the case of the Chacham, so he had the version that, if the Chacham comes to the east, I'm running to the west. If the Chacham comes to the west, I'm running to the east. So he had the absolute opposite version. So Kasha Nachum and Nachum Kasha Chacham and Chacham. So his version has a contradiction between whether you want to go to the Chacham or you want to run away from the Chacham. It has a contradiction. Do you want to run away from the Nachum or you want to run towards the Nachum? So how do you explain that discrepancy in terms of his version of the Mishnah? So Nachum lo kasha. The Nachum case is not a kasha. Ha b'par hegvana. One case is talking about the Anachri, who is not talking necessarily about bandits, it's tax collectors. Tax collectors, that's the fiercest type of enemy that you can imagine. So you want to run, like the plague, when you have a tax collector coming. So the Mishnah is talking about there's an Nachri tax collector coming towards the east. So then you want to run to the west and vice versa. Have Mari the Masa. But his version, his Mishnah or Brisa that he had collected, you want to run towards the Nachri, is talking about it's like the governor who's going to take care. You're having a problem, with pollution. You're having a problem with your garbage pickup or whatever. It's like the alderman. So this is somebody who you want to be able to greet. You want to it's the mayor Lightfoot, whatever. You want to talk to her about, keeping your city straight and your streets safe and so forth. And, you want to be able to take care of your business and get your needs taken care of. Chacham lo kasha. The case of the Chacham also not a kasha. Sometimes you want to run towards the Chacham. Sometimes you want to run away from the Chacham. Have a Mosif Pirki. If it's somebody who teaches like good knockout shiurim, so then, you want to run towards the Chacham. Have a Mikri Shema. But if it's somebody who is a kindergarten teacher who's just teaching Shema Yisrael, you have no need for that Chacham, so you'd rather go in the other direction. Some explain because those who are, like the kindergarten teachers, these are the people who are running the schools. So they're coming to collect money. So you run to the opposite direction because you don't want to hit them. You don't want them to hit you up for money. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda said that if one of the people is a Rebbe, is your Rebbe, so then you can't say that, retroactively, turns out I always had in mind I wanted to go to the other guy. What are you talking about? Of course you would have wanted to go to your Rebbe. But the Chachamim, however, disagree. The Chachamim say that's not necessarily true. If we're evaluating your mindset, sometimes you want to check out a different Rebbe. Say, I listen to my Rebbe all the time. I want to check out this other Rosh Hashiva to see what he's like. Sometimes you prefer hearing the other Rosh Hashiva whom you never have a chance to hear more than your own Rebbe. So Rav said, this whole din of our Mishnah, that you get to make it tonight. Now it happens, we pass like our Mishnah. But he said, but Rav says, not so fast. Maybe we shouldn't pass like our Mishnah because it's against what was said by a certain Chacham. Okay, this Chacham, it doesn't necessarily get too much attention throughout Shas. His name doesn't appear so much, so we should remember, you hear this person's name, so this is kind of like what he's famous for, certainly something he's famous for. So our Mishnah should be discounted because of the tradition that was presented to us by the Chacham, whose name is Ayo. Ayo. What did Ayo say? Ayo basically said, we don't hold by this principle of a berera. You don't get this idea of retroactive designation, nothing doing. The Tani Ayo, what did Ayo say? Rabbi Yehuda Omer, he has a version of Rabbi Yehuda, and we care about what Rabbi Yehuda says. Rabbi Yehuda, according to his version, Omer, not so much that he's only arguing in a case where one of the Chachamim is coming as your Rebbe. He says, no, I don't hold by this altogether. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, you can't have this brera idea where you're going to have a retroactive designation to say, all along it turns out I want to go to the east. All along I wanted to go to the west. You don't know. Elim ba'chak on the mizrach, eruvo the mizrach. In ba'chak on the marav, eruvo the marav. You can say that I put my eruv towards the east. And if the chacham turns out that he was there all along in the east side, like within 4,000 amos of where I was at the beginning of Shabbos, so then, okay, that's where I'm calling my eruv, because it turns out that at the moment that you put it down, it was already a true statement about lakan and lakan, but to put it in both directions and the chachamim coming from both directions, and you're going to decide which chacham you really wanted retroactively, that you can't do. So Maishna, So we say, what's the difference? According to Rabbi Yehuda's reasoning, why is it that you can't do lakan, but you would be allowed to do in either direction? So Maishna lakan dulo to ain brera, because obviously he says there's no concept of brera, retroactive designation. Okay, that's fine. Legitimate. You want to hold that way, fine. But you have to be consistent. So the Mizrach, the Marav Nami, ain brera. So if you're going to put out your food both on the east side and the west side and say whichever direction the Chacham comes to, so that's where my Erev is going to be. So you don't know if the Chacham is eventually going to come on Shabbos. So that's also a problem with Brera. So say, no, Rabbi Yehuda's case is different from our case. Our case, the Chacham could be 5,000, could be 5,500, feet away at the beginning of Shabbos, and then he decides to go 2,000 amos that he's allowed to go, and he turns down in the middle of Shabbos to be 3,500 feet away from you. So then you can use your Erev on the east, if he's on the east side, which is 2,000 amos away, and then go another 1,500 feet. But Rabbi Yehuda's case, where he allows it, is not where the Chacham was 5,500 feet away at the beginning of Shabbos. He was 3,980 feet away at the beginning of Shabbos. You just didn't know it. You found that afterwards. So at the time that you put your Erev on the east side, and he was 3,980 feet away on the east side, so you would have been able to go to him at that moment in time. So therefore, that's not a case of Brera. I'm Rabbi Yochanan, Kfar Ba Chacham. Rabbi Yehuda's case was the Chacham was already within your 4,000 amos. You just didn't know it. So he said, okay, whichever direction he's within my 4,000 amos, I want my Erev to be Kona. That's not retroactive designation. That's Iglai Milsa. That it's a Giloi Milsa that I find out what the reality was at the time that I actually put down the Erev. But it's not a reality that's only going to happen later in time. That's not considered to be Brera. So Adarabba, so now we say, wait a second, why should we discount our Mishnah because of Ayo? We like Ayo, but maybe Ayo should take a second seat to our Mishnah. Adarabba, Leisla da Ayo, we must listen. Why don't we discount Ayo because of our Mishnah? Ultimately, that's what we're going to do. But that's the question now that's posed by the Gemara. So we say, Lo Sakadaitek. So we say, no, not so fast, because Ayo presented a certain version of Rabbi Yehuda, and the version that Ayo presented of Rabbi Yehuda was actually based on other source material that we have, a more accurate rendition of the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Because we find elsewhere that there's a Mishnah that clearly indicates that Rabbi Yehuda really doesn't subscribe to the principle of Brera, and that's more consistent with the version of Rabbi Yehuda that was presented by Ayo. It's not, because the Mishnah says, famous Mishnah in where is the Mishnah? The Mishnah is in it's nowhere. It's a brisa. It's a famous brisa. So the brisa says it should be the Tanya. A person acquires wine from a kutim. This is quoted all over the Gemara. This brisa. He acquires wine from the kutim. The kutim were a sect of the Jews. A question whether they were legitimately converted to Judaism or not. But even if they were legitimately converted to Judaism, they were not so careful about taking truma, taking tithes. So therefore, if you bought something from them, you couldn't assume that they were tithe. You would have to take the tithes. So if you bought wine from the kutim, Omer, and you didn't have utensils available to be mafresh, truma and meiser, and to take part of the wine and put it into a utensil as truma, another part of the wine and put it into another utensil as meiser rishon and trumas meiser. You didn't have other kalim with you, so you just wanted to be able to drink some of the wine and to designate, a portion of the bottle that you were acquiring from the kutim, a portion of the bottle. You wanted to be able to designate as a truma and meiser. Omer, so this is what you could do. According to at least the first Tana, you say, okay, fine. So I have 100 lugin, or 100 measures, right? A lugin is like 12 ounces or so. There are 100 measures in this barrel, okay, that I'm buying from the kutim. Shnei lugin shani yasi lahafresh. So 2 of the lugin out of the 100 that are in this barrel that I'm going to eventually set aside are ain't truma. So that's going to count as my truma gedola. 1/50th will count as truma gedola. Asara, then I'll take an additional 10 measures. An additional 10 lugin will count as a meiser rishon. From the barrel, that's going to count as meiser rishon. And tisha meiser sheni umecho. And 9 additional measures, because I have to take 1/10 of everything that's left over. So there'll be 9 additional measures. Well, it's just like, because I only have 90 minus a little bit, left over. So 9, which is 1/10 of that, I'm going to designate as meiser sheni. the Ma'aser Sheni, I can transfer the Kedusha onto some coin that I've set aside. That's Umekel. I'm going to transfer the Kedusha. And V'shosim miyad. And because of the fact that even though you haven't actually taken any of the wine off, but because of the fact that you've designated the wine, and then later on, whatever you take off, you can say, it turns out this is what I designated. It turns out this is what I designated. That's called Breira. That's called Breira. Umecha v'shosim miyad. And this is also a Drabanan case, because maybe the Kutim did take the Chumos Samaisos. And we say, and here we're saying you could do Breira. Tivei Rabbi Meir, and this is what Rabbi Meir says, that you're allowed to do Breira. But there are three, according to this version, there are three Tanaim who disagree with Rabbi Meir. There are three Tanaim who say you're not allowed to do that. And one of them is Rabbi Yehuda, so that seems to support Ayos version. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, Osrin, they all say that you're not allowed to do it. I'll read one more line because this just concludes the thought. Ula Amar Leisa La'ayo Mimasnisin. So Ula says, like we paskin, no. We're going to discount Ayo because of the din of our Mishnah. But Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, Osrin. But it says that Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, all of these Tanaim, including Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah, say that you cannot subscribe to the principle of a Breira when you're trying to designate portions of the barrel of wine to be Chumos Samaisos and say retroactively it'll turn out that you figure out what you had designated. So Ula says, no, that's not the way in which he has the version. That's not his edition of the Mishnah. He has it as Zuzi. Ula Zuzi Ketani. That he has that rather than there being one Tana who says that you can do this designation and three Tanaim that say you don't, he has it as a 2 and 2 versus 2 lineup, matchup. He says, Ketivei Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, that both Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, according to his version, hold that you are allowed to do this retroactive designation. That it's a Divrei Rabbi Meir and not Rabbi Yehuda, but Divrei Rabbi Meir bir Rabbi Yehuda, period. And then it's for Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, Osrin. So according to his version, Rabbi Yehuda is on the same side as Rabbi Meir, that he allows Breira, and therefore this indicates that Rabbi Yehuda's Shita is against the way that Ayo understood it. Rabbi Yehuda holds that Breira is something which is perfectly viable, in which case it could be viable in the case of Erevei Tchumen as well. And we'll stop here. Everybody have a wonderful day. Okay, see ya.